challenge of tax justice is a challenge that unites ordinary citizens in rich and poor nations alike.
The effects of a broken trust are felt. We expect politicians, agencies, and judges to react. I think that's why we're here today.
And I think we have to think about policy in a world that is changing and developing all the while.
Frankly, corporations that have been in those boardrooms, they're much more vulnerable in the inside than they may seem on the outside. They're concerned about reputational risk, the public hearings, the prosecutions, Ava Eva Jolie. They're concerned about the activist community, the whistleblowers, the investigative journalists. They're concerned about the pension funds and the investment community, what questions they're asking. They're concerned about social media, the name and shame, the boycotting. They're concerned about groups like these and the kind of statements that you're going to be making. So basically, I want to say that you are much more powerful than may seem from the outside.
We have a 21st century globalized economy with large, highly integrated multinational enterprises. Yet we are still using a system that is largely based on the 19th century or early 20th century, where we consider that these firms operate as separate entities and they deal with each other at an arm's length. In other words, that they are all unrelated parties acting as if they didn't know one another.
We must recognize that the reality of today's multinational corporation is that they deliberately structure themselves as multiple legal entities, but that they operate in practice as one big business across the globe.
The OECD principle of comparables is flawed theoretically. It's basically a principle, it's not principle, it's ad hoc, and it's very difficult to assess tax on an ad hoc basis.
I understand the urgent issues are, identified by developed countries are important, but developing countries have identified for decades the issue of source-based taxation. Why is that not considered to be an urgent issue if it has been an urgent issue for developing countries for decades?
To a lot of transfer pricing people, and they say, actually, we're bringing in a lot of money with our transfer pricing. It's just the hard cases that are really difficult. Now, of course, comparables is an issue because countries have generally said we want local comparables because our market is different from the European market where there's data, and comparables themselves have a woolliness about them.
That the process is not yet inclusive. I don't think it is enough to consult. There is a slogan in our movement which says, if you are not at the table, you are on the menu.
And the central problem which we identified is the so-called separate entity or arm's length principles. The problem is that those treaty principles were developed at a time when international investment was primarily portfolio investment. And that provides a perverse incentive, really, for companies to create. Now, Chris Lennon said RTZ had 1,000 affiliates, and that's not unusual. Many transnational corporations have far more entities.
Adam, I assume that the socially responsible investment community, like the larger investment community, looks at MNEs as integrated entities, as unitary entities.
No, but I think you're right. We see them as one entity, and I think most investors see them as one entity. And I think it's a fiction that they're separate entities, and it's a fiction that that these agreements that they have with these entities are contracts.
Was the apportion method in the case of transfer pricing. It was rejected by developing countries because it was very dangerous. It's to put the wolf in order to safeguard the chicken.
As a member of the UN Tax Committee, I headed the subcommittee on capacity building and worked to help developing countries share successful tax practices with one another. Unfortunately, this work, as well as the work of the committee as a whole, was severely under-resourced, which left a lot of potential for solutions untapped.
So we are trying to bring in the developing country perspective. It is important that this be dealt with locally, as was mentioned earlier, because we want very much to get the views from the developing countries themselves, not from others who are speaking for them.
But I'll just say that country by country reporting is critical because tax avoiders have relied upon lack of information exchange to avoid tax, and it's very important that information actually gets to developing countries on the ground and that they're put in a position to analyse it and make use of it and make sure that proper taxes are paid.
Most of the information was being collected and studied by the former United Nations Center on Transnational Corporations, which was closed in the 90s. So, and is now resumed to some files in the UNCTAD headquarters in Geneva. So a quick suggestion is, if we can suggest something, is to revive the UNCTC.
If you look at the way advanced pricing agreements are being negotiated these days, they're usually bilateral. So that could be a way, instead of having one formula that applies to all countries, as we ease into these, because right now I think it wouldn't be wise, like the OECD says, to radically change into that. But my view is that formulary apportionment, together with the arm's length principle, should work hand in hand. It shouldn't be seen as, you know, opposite sides, polar opposites of what is really going on.
I realize that the corporate tax avoidance is not only a significant, very significant social and human rights and environmental issue, but it's been largely ignored.
We must put a human face on the debates about taxation. While some tax experts, corporate lawyers, policymakers would like to keep the discussions on global tax system behind closed doors, we know that this discussion has an enormous impact on all of us.